spit on my Lord in every way. Yet I'm still welcome in the arms of the King.
When you think of the crises, this is preaching during crises, which is more difficult context, newer context, or maybe old, when it comes to preaching now, or is shaping how you're preaching now more than the past, whether it's the pandemic and that context, the Trump-Biden, I think the political Trumpism, I would even say, right or wrong, whether they like it or not, definitely brought in a different way of thinking about politics. Well, both parties probably have. And then third, critical race theory, or the riots or the looting, that sort of thing. What you think is more of a challenge to preach into?
Yeah.
Use as preaching.
Well, to me, preaching is always, this is not rocket science or not a news flash, but preaching is always hyper-local. Mm-hmm. You're always preaching to specific people and in a specific context. That's why you can never, you guys have tried this before. I know I've tried it sometimes, re-preaching a sermon. Mm-hmm. And even to the same congregation, and you're in a pinch. Yeah. I found myself
you tried, don't you?
doing more work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It just didn't. That's
Can't
not,
say that here. Yeah, that's right.
It's so depressing too.
Even if I said it here 6 years ago, things have changed here, and so because of the hyper local context, I think a lot of this, you take your cue. I often ask guys, why do you choose the text you preach on? Okay, now if you follow a lectionary or something like that, then you say, okay, there's a lectionary text. Okay, but why? Which of the three did you choose? The right answer is not, well, this one was easiest.
Yeah, right.
Which is probably the more accurate answer, right? Frankly, but the answer should be, whether you choose a lectionary or not, the answer should be, what do my hearers need right today? And that means I need to listen to them. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not going to suggest that if you happen to be in small town Nebraska, we'll pick on them and there's no race riots, that means you shouldn't talk about race issues. Yeah. Maybe that's where you need to talk about it the most. Because you need to bring that in, but it really is a matter of you might look at it like what would be most difficult for your hearers to hear right now, or what do they need to hear most, and then lean into that particular issue, that particular concept. This whole thing with the election coming up this fall is going to be a dumpster fire, I'm sure. Yeah. And the need for but also with the riots and such, and even with the pandemic, the distinctive nature of the Christian community, what makes us different, I think is a discussion we need to have more and more, and not just kind of in opposition to the world, but for the world. Mm-hmm. What does the world need us to be with respect to this particular crisis?
Yeah. The danger is so what you're saying is because of social media and our technological access, no matter where you live, you are now unfortunately part of global crises, no matter what. And you are right. Like, I'll leave Chicago and go to up northern Michigan, and it's like, oh, no one's wearing a mask, and just feels good. There's no anger going on as far as racial divisions or whatever. But it definitely is a lot more it would have been 20 years ago. So like I go to Traverse City, Michigan, they're definitely talking about all these issues that might have no effect in their community. There's no race. There's only one race, whatever. They're not whatever. But the danger is you're going off on racism, whatever. And I think that's good. But what if you're doing that all the time? And now it's like, now you're kind of like talking to somebody else, not us.
Yeah, I guess my question is always, what is driving the proclamation? Is it whatever's going on in the culture? Because there's not always
driving it.
Yeah, there's not always a crisis going on. So
in people's lives there are, but not globally.
But not globally. Yeah. There's not like this common crisis always happening. So
just a second. Famous last words from Bob Hiller, because I think we are in the age of constant crisis.
Yeah, you might be right. It's not 2020 every year.
Yeah, that's right.
It will be.
That's right.
So what's driving it is my question too. I found a quote.
That's great.
Bill Swirla wrote this quote. He said, "The culture is always angry at the church for fiddling while Rome burns, but the church needs to be reminded that while Rome was burning, they were vigorously debating the two natures of Christ and the Trinity. So how much do we preach to the temporal and to the eternal?" So in other words, I mean, sometimes I really love that quote, and other times, like right now, that quote's not an option. I can't say, hey, I know there's big race riots going on outside, but today we're going to talk about the hypostatic union or how the Spirit proceeds or something like this. So what is driving the proclamation? I mean, I guess it's probably everything at once, right?
And this is what makes preaching really hard, I think, because you don't want to. It's too easy just to. We're going to talk about the hypostatic union, or it's too easy just to say, here's the race stuff that we need to involve ourselves in, or however we're going to do it. I actually think that they need each other. That if you're not talking about the things that are affecting your people and their lives today, then I don't care how orthodox you are. It's not gonna have a significant impact on
clanging symbol.
At the same time, of course, if you're just talking about whatever happens to be the crisis of the day without any sort of deep theological foundations, then you're a mist that's here today and gone tomorrow. So I actually think that the tough part is, and this is not a suggestion for your next sermon series, but this hypostatic union and its effect on riots and.
Oh, I did that last week.
But that's the challenge, and I think that's the task of preaching is to be deeply theological in a way that is significant for your hearers.
Yeah.
And that requires that you study theology as carefully as you study the culture, and vice versa.
And they all affect one another. Even what you just mentioned, you could probably come using the contemporary context and talk about a deep theological issue.
And it might be that because we're not doing deep theology in our preaching, people don't know how to respond. The deep theology actually helps you speak to this, and maybe that's part of why we're getting to this point is because we haven't thought about these things theologically enough. Yeah.
And are we preparing, just like I think we've not prepared people to deal with nuances in their arguments or conversations and accept this is bad, this is good with one person. I wonder theologically, because we're not, and Dave Schmidt did I thought fascinating, we need to be doing theological doctrinal points that he feels like that's where we're kind of not, but he's absolutely right. He nailed me in the heart with that, I think. Really going after predestination should be a goal of mine in a sermon at some point, what that means, et cetera. Not always going to justification, although that's always a part of it. But I think if we're not teaching our people to think more deeply about everything, let alone theology, I don't know if we're doing that.
And sometimes this is where, we may be in constant crisis mode. But when we're not, sometimes the preacher's job is to start a crisis.
That's good. I like that. Yeah.
For a kind of I think of I did a sermon series in Minnesota one time on the Lord's Supper. I had 6 weeks I put together, I think, during Lent. And a different aspect of the Lord's Supper, I was trying to do kind of a catechetical type thing. And at one of the sermons, I was talking about anticipation at the Lord's Supper. When we commune, we anticipate, foretaste of the feast to come type of thing. And I started the sermon by saying, I hate to be the one to mention this to you guys, or to state this, but Jesus isn't here today. And, immediately people kind of, wait a minute, what's he talking about?
Yeah.
We talk so much about, especially with respect to the Lord's Supper, we talk about
real presence.
The real presence, right? And I really wanted to highlight the real absence of Jesus. It's not my creation. I stole that from Mark Allen Powell. But this real absence, and he's not here as he was and as he will be. And so we celebrate that he is here in this special, mysterious, sacramental way. But we do so always longing for his return. And our practice at my congregation was we had worship in the Bible class, and I would always begin Bible class by saying, anybody have any questions or anything you want to talk about from the service or from the sermon? And that particular day, I walked into Bible class, and I asked that question. About 8 hands shot up. And we were really upset when you said Jesus isn't here. And we kind of leaned into that, and we scrapped whatever I had planned for Bible study. And we talked about that for.
Is that right?
But you kind of sometimes we kind of need to disrupt and confront and have a collision with the complacency, theological complacency or practical complacency. And sermons. I'm not after kind of a rebellious rebel preacher who's always creating controversies.
That's right.
But theologically, we should be challenging and confronting those ways in which we've grown unfaithful.
That's good. practicing for when we do have crisis as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it.
I stole from the treasury. What do you do with that? That's a crisis. And I'll probably be defrocked. Let's talk about this.
That's right. You will not make your mortgage payment.